episode of the Resinator's Conquest podcast. Thank you for joining me. Like I said last week, this week is going to be about the First Blood round sequence. So let's get started. Just like last Argument of Kings, we're going to have 5 different phases of the round. Phase 1 is the reinforcement phase. Phase 2 is the command phase. Phase 3 is the supremacy phase. Phase 4 is the action phase. And then last, phase 5, the victory phase. Phase 1, reinforcement phase. Unlike last Argument of King, where all regiments are held in reinforcement, First Blood is a little bit different, where you're going to deploy most of your army. There are sometimes scenarios where you're going to want to keep some of them in reserve, and you can do that. And usually that's indicated by the special rule of flank or other special rules that say that they can be held in reinforcement. Otherwise, you're going to set up all your reinforcements in your deployment zone. When you want to bring in your regiment from reinforcement, you're going to check your scenario and see where the reinforcement zone is. And that's the area you can bring in your regiments. One last note about reinforcements. If at the end of the game, any regiment is left in reinforcements, they are considered destroyed. Alright, that's the reinforcement phase. Moving on to the command phase. In the command phase, you're going to gather up all your command cards and organize them in the order that you would like them to play. You want to take special care to look at the command abilities of the different officers and leaders and characters in your warband, because you want to make sure to play some of those before you activate the actual regiment that's going to, use that bonus. Or, like, let's say it's an attack bonus. You want to play your command card that has the command ability first to give your regiment like an extra attack, and then when you actually play that command card of the regiment, then they do a clash. They have now a bonus in either like attacks or an extra clash, like case of the Old Dominion, or just some other kind of bonuses that a command ability will give them in order to help them out in their fighting. Sometimes it's a defensive bonus like Bastion or Phalanx or something like that. But it's really important to look at those command abilities, how long they last. Does it last only till the end of the round or until the next activation? And then work out how you want to create your command stack. Now remember, when you're looking at them, put the first card that you want to play down first for the regiment or character that you want to play first. Then put the second one on top of it, and then keep creating the stack upwards. From there, when you flip it over, that first card will still be the card you want to play first. The supremacy phase. Count the number of command cards that you have in your stack. If they're equal to your opponent, then you both roll off until someone wins the roll. If you guys score the same thing, you'll roll off again until someone scores lower, and then that person gets to go first. If one of the players has less command cards, then that player will have a bonus and be able to modify the roll, either add 1 or subtract 1, going from 0 to 7. Then once there's a winner, that person goes first. That's the supremacy phase. Let's move on to the action phase. And now to the action phase, where things differ just a little bit from last Argument of King. Starting with the first player, they will reveal their top card of the command stack. They will take basically 7 steps in activating that card. The first step is to draw the command card and choose which regiment you want to activate. Step 2 would be to resolve any draw events. If the card has multiple draw events, you'll have to choose which one you want to activate. There are some instances and rules where you can activate multiple draw events, so keep an eye out for those as well. And one last thing, if the regiment or character that card represents is not on the battlefield, it cannot activate any draw events. Step 3 and 4 you can pretty much do in any order you would like. Here's where I'm going to differ a little bit from the actual PDF online. Step 3 in the PDF states that you will remove casualty tokens. If during the previous rounds any regiments have gained casualty tokens, this is where you'll remove them from play. Step 4 is mentioned later in the rules when it comes to command abilities. And it states in the character rules that when using command abilities, they have to be done after resolving all draw events, but before the regiment takes their first action. If the card you have activated has a command ability, this is where you'll be actually able to use that command ability. Make sure to check that you're in range of your command range, the CR on the character profile. There are also some rules that say that either other regiments, or maybe a regiment with a standard, or some other kind of scenario that the regiments could always be in the command range. So keep an eye out for that. And one last thing about command abilities, make sure to pay attention to whether or not they last until the end of the round or until the next activation. This is very important. Step 5 and 6 are going to be taking their first and second action. We're going to get to that in a little bit here and going over the list of all the actions that you can perform. But for now, we're going to keep on going into the next step. Step 7, it's funny, in the PDF, there's a little bit of an error because there's 2 step 5s, no step 6. But this is my step 7 now because we've added in command abilities, and it's step 7 to deactivate the regiment. And this is where you're going to place the command card next to the regiment, representing that you've activated that regiment already, and now they're done. Now let's go back and talk about the actions. Just like in Last Argument of Kings, the First Blood has out-of-combat actions and in-combat actions. Let's talk about the out-of-combat actions first. First out-of-combat action that we can take is to march. Again, this is an action you can always do twice. Now, one warning I have to give you in First Blood. Now, First Blood, a lot of times, the deployment zones and the arrangement of just the battlefield in general, you're a lot closer, especially being deployed at the beginning of the setup, instead of, coming in from reinforcements. You're really close to your opponent. Our next out-of-combat action is going to be a charge. This will make it so that your regiment is engaged with the enemy regiment. I'll describe it in more detail in a later video, but for right now, it's basically you do a roll at your movement and you can charge that far forward into the enemy regiment. One difference between Last Argument of King and First Blood is, in First Blood, if you do not make the charge, you do not move. The next out-of-combat action you can perform is a rally, and this will take your regiment from being broken to being unbroken. Another out-of-combat action you can take is to take aim. This is where you're going to increase your volley characteristic of the regiment by 1. And the last out-of-combat action you can take goes along with take aim, which is to volley. And this is where you're actually going to shoot. Those were the out-of-combat actions. Let's move on to the in-combat actions. The first in-combat action you can perform would be to clash. This is a melee. This is where you're going to be swinging your sword, stabbing your daggers, swinging your batons, whatever the weapons you have, whether it's fists, claws, weapons. When you're performing a clash, you can use your C characteristic on the character or regiment profile. The next combat action you can take would be to do a combat rally. It's exactly like a rally, but it's just when you're engaged. Another in-combat action you could take would be to take a combat reform. And this would be to reforming your ranks and files in order to make the most out of making attacks to enemy regiments. Another in-combat action you could take would be to inspire. And this is where you're going to increase your clash value by 1. So that would be the C characteristic under your regiment or character's profile. The last in-combat action you could take would be to disengage. And this is going to be where you're going to be removing yourself from being engaged with an enemy regiment. One last note about actions. Just like in Last Argument of Kings, you can choose to not move, not take any actions with your regiments. The last phase, just like in Last Argument of Kings, is the victory phase. If your player doesn't concede and is not wiped out, then continue on adding up victory points based on the scenario you're playing. Then if it's the last round of the scenario, add up all the points and see who won. That was the round sequence for First Blood. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Resinator's Conquest podcast, all about the round sequence of First Blood. Next week, I think I'm going to go into the actions. See